A woman walked into one of the most expensive restaurants in Seoul and slapped an old man across the face. Hard, in front of everyone, and not a single person in that room moved. Not the staff, not the guests, not the man sitting 2 tables away who saw the whole thing. Nobody. Except one person. A black woman. A server. The only person in the building with nothing to gain and everything to lose. She put her tray down. She walked across that dining room. And she did something that no one in that restaurant had the courage to do. She had no idea who that old man was. She had no idea who that woman really was. And she had absolutely no idea what she had just set in motion. But we'll get there. Trust me. We will get there. And when we do, you are not going to be ready for it. Nobody ever is. Before you go, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell because this story takes turns that even I didn't see coming, and you're going to want to be here when the next one drops. Now, let me set the scene. Seoul, Friday evening, Gangnam District. There was a restaurant called The Orchid Room, and if you've never been to a place where a single appetizer costs more than most people's rent, let me paint the picture for you. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering Seoul skyline, white tablecloths so crisp they could cut you, crystal glasses that had never been touched by a dishwasher. Politicians ate here, executives, heirs to fortunes they didn't earn. If you ate at the Orchid Room, you were somebody. Or you needed everybody to believe you were. The staff were ghosts, trained to smile, bow, pour, and vanish. Korean, young, clean-cut, invisible on purpose. But there was one server who refused to be invisible. Her name was Amara. She was black, American, 24 years old, 5'7" with natural hair pulled back in a low bun that sat at the base of her neck like a crown she didn't know she was wearing. Her skin was deep brown, the kind that caught light even in dim rooms and held it like a secret. Calm, watchful eyes. A mouth that never smiled unless it meant something. The other servers avoided eye contact with certain guests. Amara looked every single person in the face. Remember that, because that quality, that refusal to look down, is the thing that changed everything. She'd come to Seoul on a cultural exchange visa. She needed the work, took the job because it paid well, went home every night to a studio apartment in Mapo-gu where she trained alone in the quiet, kicking, striking. Forms she'd learned since she was a child. Muscle memory so deep it lived in her bones. But we'll come back to that. Trust me, we will come back to that. Now, the old man. He walked into the Orchid Room at exactly 7:15. No entourage, no car dropping him off. He just appeared at the front entrance like he'd materialized out of the evening air, maybe 70, maybe older. Time had worked on his face like a sculptor who wasn't gentle. White hair, thinning but combed neat. Simple dark jacket, white shirt, no tie. Shoes that were clean, but not expensive. And his hands. Pay attention to his hands. They were rough, scarred knuckles, thick, hardened fingers. The kind of hands that had been used for things that polite society pretends don't exist. He sat at a corner table near the window, unfolded his napkin, placed it on his lap, didn't look at the menu, didn't call a server, just sat there looking out at the Seoul skyline like he owned a piece of it. And here's the thing that nobody in that restaurant understood at that moment. He did own a piece of it. A piece so large, so deep, so terrifying in its scope, that the woman who was about to slap him would have crawled across broken glass to apologize if she'd known. But she didn't know. Nobody knew. And that ignorance was about to cost everyone in that building more than they could imagine. 10 minutes later, the hostess seated a woman at the next table. Her name was Vivienne Kang. Mid-40s, sharp cheekbones, sharper eyes, the kind of face that had been beautiful once and was now something else entirely, something carved and controlled and cold. She walked like the floor existed for her feet, and everyone standing on it was trespassing. Ivory silk dress cut to remind you she was untouchable. Gold at her wrists, gold at her ears. A watch on her left hand that cost more than a sedan. Nobody at the tables knew who she was. Neither did Amara. All anyone could see was a woman dripping in money who moved like the rest of the world existed on a guest pass she could revoke at any time. But the staff knew something Amara didn't. And that gap in knowledge, that one blind spot, is the thing that turned a confrontation into a war. Vivian barked orders at the nearest server the moment she sat down. Wine too warm, bread cut unevenly, lighting half a shade too yellow. She spoke to them like they were malfunctioning appliances. And here's what Amara noticed but couldn't explain. The staff weren't just obeying this woman. They were terrified of her. Not the normal kind of afraid. The deep kind. The kind where your body stiffens when someone walks past and you don't exhale until they sit down. Eyes went blank. Smiles went rigid. Spines went stiff. Something about this woman had power over them that went way beyond a difficult customer. Amara didn't know why. She was about to find out the hard way. The old man coughed. Listen to me. Right here. This is the moment. This is the hinge that the entire night swings on. One cough, a small dry cough from an old man whose throat was tired. That's all it took to start a chain of events that would destroy an empire, collapse a 1,000-year-old dynasty, and bring two people together who hadn't seen each other since they were children. One cough. Vivian stopped mid-sentence. She turned her head slowly and looked at him the way a hawk looks at something it's deciding, whether to eat or ignore. She chose wrong. "Excuse me," she said. "This is a private dining area." The old man looked at her, steady eyes. He gave her a small, polite nod, said nothing. "Did you hear me?" Louder now, heads turning at the surrounding tables. "This section is reserved. How did you even get in here?" "I was seated here by the young lady at the front," he said softly. But Vivian wasn't listening to his words anymore. She was looking at his jacket, his shoes, his rough, scarred hands. She was doing math. And the answer she arrived at was, this man doesn't belong here. She made one mistake in that calculation. She assumed that because a man looked poor, he was powerless. That mistake was about to eat her alive. "You should leave," she said flatly. "This isn't a soup kitchen." The whole section went dead. 2 tables away, a couple buried their faces in their menus. A businessman near the window took a long sip of wine and stared at the tablecloth. Nobody said a word. Nobody stood up. 50 people in earshot of an old man being publicly humiliated, and every single one of them decided it was not their problem. The old man blinked once, slowly. And then he did something extraordinary. He stayed seated, looked at this woman who had just insulted him in front of an entire dining room, and said, in a voice so calm it was almost a whisper, "I believe I'll finish my tea, if you don't mind." Something behind Vivian's eyes cracked. Rage, not the explosive kind, the polished kind, the kind that smiles right before it strikes. She stood up, walked to his table, leaned down close enough that her perfume mixed with the steam rising from his teacup, and she slapped him across the face with her full open palm. The sound cracked through the dining room like a gunshot. His head snapped to the side. A thin line of red split the corner of his mouth. Blood. His teacup rattled on its saucer. The overhead chandelier threw light across his face and caught, the blood glistening on his lip. An old man, bleeding, in a restaurant, because a woman decided he wasn't rich enough to breathe the same air. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Servers froze mid-step. Guests stared at their plates like the answer to this situation was written somewhere between the appetizer and the main course. 50 people, not one sound. And then Amara put down her serving tray. She was 3 tables away. She'd seen everything. Every person in that room looked at that old man being humiliated and decided one by one that it wasn't their fight. The staff stood with their heads bowed, terrified, paralyzed, choosing their paychecks over a man's dignity. Not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. And Amara made a choice that would reshape her entire life. She didn't know it then. She thought she was just doing the right thing. She had no idea she was lighting a fuse connected to enough dynamite to blow up half of Seoul's power structure. She walked across that dining room, shoes silent on the polished marble, face calm, hands loose at her sides. She stopped directly in front of Vivienne Kang. "You need to apologize to him," Amara said. Vivienne looked at her like she was examining something stuck to the bottom of her designer heel. "What did you just say to me?" "You hit an elderly man in the face for sitting in a chair. I don't care who you are. You need to apologize." That laugh. Short. Sharp. A sound designed not to express joy but to demolish whoever was standing in front of her. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Amara didn't blink. "I know what you just did. That's enough." And then Vivienne said something that ripped the floor out from under everything Amara thought she understood about that room. "This is my restaurant." She said it slowly, deliberately, the way you pull a knife from a sheath. "My name is on the building. My money built every wall you're standing between, every plate you carry, every paycheck you cash. All of it comes from me." And suddenly, the entire room rearranged itself in Amara's mind, the terror on the servers' faces, the rigid smiles, the way nobody moved when this woman slapped an old man across the mouth. They all knew. Every single person in that building knew who Vivienne Kang was and what she could do to them. Everyone except Amara. Now here's the thing, and I need you to understand this because this is the heart of the story. Finding out that this woman owned the restaurant, that she controlled Amara's job, her income, her visa status, her ability to survive in this country, all of that information landed on Amara like a freight train. And it did not move her face a single millimeter. Not one. Because Amara grew up in a house where right was right and wrong was wrong, and the size of someone's bank account did not get to rearrange those two things. Ever. "I don't care if you own the building, the block, or the whole district," Amara said. "You hit an old man. You owe him an apology." Silence so thick you could choke on it. A server. A foreign server. A black woman in a country where she had no connections, no safety net, no powerful last name to hide behind, just told the owner of the establishment to her face that she was wrong, and meant every syllable. Vivienne's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowed to slits, and she raised her hand again, this time aimed at Amara. She never landed it. Amara didn't block it, didn't step backward. She moved into it, one step forward, caught Vivienne's wrist in midair, redirected the momentum, and in the same fluid motion, she slapped Vivienne Kang across the face with her own open hand. The sound was different this time, sharper, cleaner. It echoed off the windows, because the entire room was holding its breath and there was nothing to absorb the impact except disbelief. Vivienne stumbled back, hand on her cheek, eyes so wide the whites showed all the way around, not from pain, from impossibility. In 45 years of life, in decades of being the most powerful person in every room she walked into, no one had ever put a hand on her. Nobody. And this girl, this server, this black girl from another country, standing in a borrowed uniform in a restaurant she didn't own, just did it in front of everyone. "You," Vivienne whispered, voice shaking, not with fear, with a fury so raw it distorted her face. "You are done." Things went sideways fast. Vivienne snapped her fingers. One snap, like calling a dog. And 30 seconds later, a man came bursting from the back office like the building was on fire. The manager, Seo Jun-ho, tall, thin, wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of man who disappeared when his boss was unhappy and reappeared the second she needed someone punished. He came out adjusting his tie, face already arranged into an expression of concern, and the moment he saw Vivienne, he bowed so deep and so fast it looked like his spine was spring-loaded. "Ms. Kang, what happened? Are you all right? Who did this to you?" Not a single glance at the old man, not one look at the blood drying on his lip. Straight to Vivienne. Like she was the only person in that room who counted as human. And Amara understood the full picture. The depth of that bow. The way he said her name. This woman didn't just own the restaurant, she owned him. She owned all of them. And Amara was standing in the middle of a machine that was designed to protect one person and crush anyone who threatened her. But even then, even with that understanding crashing over her like ice water, Amara held on to one last shred of hope. Because the manager had eyes. He could see the old man's face. He could see the blood. And maybe, just maybe, he would choose truth. He didn't. He chose the paycheck. And that choice is going to follow him for the rest of his life. She struck Ms. Kang, another server blurted, pointing at Amara, voice trembling, not lying out of malice, lying out of survival. She knew which side of the room signed her checks. The manager turned to Amara, face like carved stone. "You struck the owner of this establishment?" "She struck an elderly guest first," Amara said. Steady, clear, not a tremor. "I stood up for him, that's all I did." He looked at the old man, looked at the blood, looked at the teacup still rattling on its saucer. Then he looked back at Vivienne. And Amara watched the last light of hope in that room die. Because she could see it in his eyes. He knew. He knew exactly what happened. He knew who hit who first. He knew the truth. And he buried it. "Ms. Kang is the owner of the Orchid Room," he said, like reading a death sentence. "She owns 3 more restaurants in Seoul and 2 in Tokyo. You've committed an act of violence against the most important person in this building. You're terminated immediately." Vivienne smiled. Cold. Perfect. The kind of smile that belongs on a porcelain mask in a museum. "Terminated isn't enough," she said. And then, the manager did something that made every person in that room flinch. Junho raised his hand and swung it at Amara's face. Not a warning, not a gesture. A full, committed strike aimed at a woman half his size who had done nothing, except stand up for an old man nobody else in that building cared about. She ducked. Clean. Smooth. Like she'd been born expecting this moment. Her body dropped low, left foot planted, and as his fist sailed over her head, she drove her right foot into his midsection with a front kick that had 12 years of dojo training behind it. The impact sent him crashing backward into a table. Crystal glasses exploded. Silverware scattered across the marble floor like shrapnel. His back hit a chair, his legs gave out, and he went down hard. His glasses flew off his face and skidded 10 feet across the polished floor. He didn't get up. He just lay there, gasping, one hand on his cracked ribs, the other groping blindly for his glasses like a man searching, for his dignity and finding neither. Vivienne screamed. Not out of concern for the manager, out of pure, disbelieving rage that this girl kept refusing to fall. "Security, restrain her, now! Someone call the police!" 2 security guards came from the entrance, big men, broad shoulders, earpieces. They moved toward Amara from both sides. She didn't run, feet shoulder-width apart, weight centered, hands open and loose at her sides. Not aggressive. Not scared. Ready. And there was something in that stance, something in the terrifying stillness of her body that told the guards a story they didn't want to hear. This woman had stood like this before. Many times. Her body knew this position the way a pianist's fingers know the keys. Whatever they were about to try, she had rehearsed the answer 1,000 times. One of the guards was ex-military. He recognized the stance. He recognized the calm, and he knew, from years of experience, that the people who stood that quiet before a fight were the people you did not want to fight. They hesitated. And that hesitation was loud. The guests scrambled. Chairs scraped back. A woman near the bar grabbed her purse and bolted for the door. A waiter dropped a plate and nobody flinched because the sound of shattering porcelain was nothing compared to the tension filling that room, like smoke from a fire nobody could see. Then the police arrived. 2 officers through the front doors with the kind of urgency that said someone important made the call. That woman, Vivian pointed at Amara. She assaulted me and my manager. I want her arrested. Now. The officers looked at Amara, looked at the manager still on the floor clutching his ribs, looked at the old man sitting quietly at his corner table, pressing a white napkin to the blood at the corner of his mouth. "Ma'am, hands behind your back, please," one officer said to Amara. She didn't argue, didn't resist. She turned around and they cuffed her. Then they cuffed the old man, too, because Vivian pointed at him and said, "He started this. He was trespassing." Let that sink in. They put handcuffs on an old man for sitting in a restaurant, for ordering tea, for existing in a space that a rich woman decided he had no right to occupy. The officers walked them both out the front doors, into the night air, into the back of a patrol car. And that should have been the end of the story. Rich woman wins. Good people lose. The world keeps spinning the way it always does, with the powerful on top and everyone else beneath them. But approximately 12 minutes later, 50 black cars turned onto the street, and the world stopped spinning. It started with the sound. Not one engine, not 10. The deep, synchronized rumble of 50 vehicles approaching from the same direction, moving at the same speed in perfect formation, like a single organism made of black steel and tinted glass. Pedestrians froze on the sidewalk. Phones came out. Traffic didn't just slow, it parted. Like the road itself understood that whatever was coming owned the right of way and always had. 50 cars, identical, armored SUVs, sedans with windows so dark they looked like moving pieces of night. And in the center, one vehicle longer and lower than the rest, moving with a slow, predatory grace that made your chest tighten just watching it. They reached the Orchid Room and fanned out like a military operation. Blocked every entrance, every exit, every side street. The restaurant was surrounded. Inside, forks stopped moving. Conversations died. The staff moved to the windows. Vivienne, who had been straightening her dress and rebuilding her composure, looked out through the glass and the color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. The center vehicle's door opened, and he stepped out. 6'2", built like the word inevitable. Pitch black bespoke suit sculpted to his broad frame like a second skin. No tie, top button undone. The kind of arrogant, relaxed dominance that said he didn't need a weapon because he was the weapon. Dark hair swept back, jaw carved from something harder than bone, and eyes that were black. Not dark brown, black. Empty of warmth. Empty of mercy. Scanning the scene like a predator deciding which animal to eat first. His name was Kang Dae-jung, and every single person in that restaurant who had ever heard the name felt their blood crystallize in their veins, because Kang Dae-jung was the head of the Korean Mafia Brotherhood. Not a gang leader, not a crime boss the way movies and newspapers paint it. He was the axis around which an entire shadow economy rotated. He controlled shipping ports, financial networks, entire sectors of industry that the public didn't know had an invisible hand guiding them. Governments consulted him. Intelligence agencies avoided him. Rival organizations didn't compete with him because there was nothing to compete with. He had already won everything. Behind him, men in black. Suits poured from the other vehicles and formed a perimeter. Hands clasped in front of them. Faces expressionless. Eyes scanning. They weren't bodyguards the way most people understood the word. They were extensions of his will. They didn't protect him because he was fragile. They protected the world from what would happen if anyone was stupid enough to get too close. A crowd gathered on the sidewalk. Phones up. Recording. The name Kang Dae-jung moved through the crowd like an electric current. You could see it hit each person. Some stepped back. Some craned forward. One man grabbed his wife's arm and physically pulled her away from the building. He knew. Whatever was about to happen inside that restaurant, nobody with any sense wanted to be a witness. The front doors opened. Dae-jung walked in. Every head turned. Every breath stopped. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The manager, who had finally dragged himself off the floor, saw him first. His face went the color of old paper. He bowed so fast and so deep he nearly collapsed again. "Mr. Kang, sir, we had no idea you were coming. Please, allow me to prepare your usual table. My deepest apologies for any inconvenience." Vivian saw him next, and her face went through a transformation that was almost beautiful in its horror. Shock, recognition, fear, and then the desperate, scrambling attempt to reassemble her composure from the inside out. "Dae-jung," she said, and suddenly her voice was honey. Warm, soft, welcoming. Everything it had not been 5 minutes ago when she was slapping an old man and ordering a black woman arrested. "What an honor. Please sit. Let me have the chef prepare something special. I'm so sorry you had to witness any unpleasantness tonight. I assure you, it's been handled." Dae-jung raised one hand, didn't lift it far, just high enough, and the entire room went silent like he'd pressed a mute button on the building itself. He looked at Vivienne, then the manager, then the staff, then the guests. Then he spoke, and his voice was low, measured, and filled the room without rising above a conversational volume. The kind of voice that doesn't need volume because it has gravity. There is an old saying, if you want to beat a dog, first you must know who its owner is. Confusion. Vivienne blinked. The manager's brow furrowed. The staff exchanged glances. Nobody understood what he meant. Not yet. Dae-jung turned and walked back through the front doors, toward the patrol car parked at the curb. 2 people in the back seat in handcuffs, an old man, and a young black woman. His men parted. The officers stepped back, not because they were ordered to, because something in their training, something older than law, told them that this man operated above their chain of command. Dae-jung opened the car door. The old man looked up at him with those steady, quiet, unbreakable eyes. And Kang Dae-jung, the most feared man in South Korea, the man whose name made billionaires lose sleep, the man who moved through the world like death in a tailored suit, dropped to his knees on the pavement. Gravel bit into his tailored slacks. He didn't notice. The men behind him, 50 vehicles worth of soldiers and enforcers and lieutenants, every single one of them went still, because they had never seen him kneel. Not once, not ever, not for anyone. He bowed his head. "Father," he said, and his voice cracked on the word, not from weakness, from rage, from the kind of love that becomes fury when the person you love most has been harmed. The word father traveled back into the restaurant like a shockwave. People heard it, passed it. It spread like fire through dry grass. A server dropped a glass. A guest pressed her hand over her mouth. The pianist stopped mid-note, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. Father. The old man in handcuffs. The man who had been slapped. The man who had been called a trespasser. The man whose blood was still drying at the corner of his mouth. Was the father of Kang Dae-jung, the patriarch of the Brotherhood. Vivian's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of a table and held on like the floor was falling away beneath her. The manager looked like he was about to vomit on his own shoes. The servers, the guests, the security guards, every single person in that building stood frozen in the kind of terror that has no sound and no escape. Dae-jung stood. He unlocked his father's handcuffs himself. Remove them gently, the way you handle something holy. He held his father's wrists and examined the red marks the metal had pressed into his skin. His jaw tightened. His eyes went so dark they stopped reflecting light. Then he walked back into the restaurant. Slowly. Every person inside could see him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He stopped in the center of the dining room. "Now you understand the parable," he said. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. "You beat the dog. You didn't know the owner." He looked directly at Vivienne. "You struck my father. In your restaurant. In front of your guests. Your staff. Your manager." Not a single person in this room stood up for him. His eyes moved to the manager. "And you. You tried to strike the only person who did." He paused. Let the silence build until it was unbearable. And when he spoke again, every word landed like a hammer on an anvil. "I am going to make your lives miserable." He was not bluffing. And this is where the story becomes a nightmare for every person who chose wrong that night. Within 2 hours, Vivienne Kang was in handcuffs. Not for slapping an old man. For everything else. Daejung's network moved like water finding cracks in a dam. Vivienne had hidden crimes, the kind that rich people accumulate like trophies when they believe they're untouchable. Tax fraud so vast it spanned 3 countries, a network of shell companies laundering money through her restaurant empire. A paper trail connecting her to a bribery scandal that reached into city government. All of it surfaced in under 90 minutes, not because it was hard to find, because no one had ever been motivated to look. Until now. She called her lawyers. They didn't answer. She called her connections in government, suddenly unreachable. Every favor she'd ever been owed evaporated like dew in a furnace. Her phone rang and nobody picked up. Because the word had spread through every circle that mattered. Kang Daejung was involved, and no one on earth wanted to be standing on the wrong side of that line. By midnight, health inspectors shut down all 4 of her Seoul restaurants. Violations that had been invisible for years suddenly appeared in official reports. Invisible to the people Vivienne had paid to look the other way. But Vivienne's money had gone silent, and the people she'd paid were now very, very concerned about their own futures. By morning, her assets were frozen. Banks, properties, portfolios. Every financial instrument she'd ever touched, locked behind compliance holds with no resolution date. Her personal banker told her he was sorry. He did not sound sorry. He sounded like a man who had been waiting years for this call. By the next evening, journalists who'd been sitting on stories for years got the green light. Whistleblowers who'd been too afraid found protection. The dam broke. Everything Vivienne Kang had built in the shadows came flooding into daylight. She ended up in a cell, concrete walls, metal door, no one to call. And the weight of it, the shame, the exposure, the totality of the fall, crushed her. She took her own way out before the sun rose on the second day. A life built on arrogance and cruelty, ended by the consequences of both. Now, Amara. Daejung's people had the charges dropped that same night. When she walked out of the police station into the cold Seoul air, the old man was standing there waiting. A warm coat draped over his arm. He handed it to her without ceremony. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for standing up for me when no one else would." "Anyone would have done the same?" Amara said. The old man shook his head. Slow. Certain. "No. They wouldn't." And they didn't. Daejung was standing a few feet away, watching her. And something had been gnawing at him since the restaurant. The way she moved. That kick. The stance she'd taken when the guards came at her. Feet planted, weight centered, hands open. It was familiar. It was more than familiar. It was a language he spoke. But it wasn't until he looked at her hands that the final piece slammed into place. There, on the back of her right hand, between her thumb and forefinger, a tattoo. Small, circular. A lotus flower enclosed in a ring of fire. And beneath it, 3 characters in faded ink that time had softened but never erased. Daejung stopped breathing. He knew that tattoo. He had one just like it. inside of his left forearm, hidden beneath his sleeve for the last 15 years. The mark of the Hwaran Dojo, a martial arts school in Busan that hadn't officially existed since he was a teenager. It was where his father had sent him to learn discipline, to learn pain, to learn that real strength was knowing when to strike and when to hold still. And it was where he had met a girl, a little black girl with braids and fierce eyes who'd been brought to Korea by her grandmother, a woman who'd married a Korean martial artist and settled in Busan decades earlier. That little girl trained beside him for 3 years. She was the only person who had ever thrown him on the mat and made him laugh about it afterward. The only person who had ever beaten him in a sparring match and then offered her hand to help him up like it meant nothing. Her name was Amara. Amara, Daejung said, and his voice sounded different. Not like a boss, not like a man who commanded armies, like a boy who'd just walked into a room and found something he thought was gone forever. She turned. She didn't recognize him. How could she? He'd been 12 the last time she saw him. Skinny, awkward, all elbows and knees and a temper he hadn't learned to control. Now he was this. Whatever this was. "Do I know you?" she asked. He pushed his sleeve back, showed her the tattoo on his forearm. Same lotus, same ring of fire, same 3 characters. She stared at it. Then she looked at his face. Really looked. Past the suit. Past the power. Past the carved jaw and the black eyes, and the army standing behind him. She looked for the boy, and she found him. "Daejung?" she whispered. "Little Daejung from the dojo?" He smiled. And for the first time that night, it was not the smile of a man who controlled an empire. It was the smile of a 12-year-old boy who had just found his best friend. His father watched from a few steps away, and the old man, whose lip was still swollen, whose wrists still bore the marks of handcuffs, smiled too. "Come," Min-soo said. "Both of you. Let's go home." The Kang estate sat in the hills above Seoul, behind walls and gardens and silence so thick you could feel it on your skin. Min-soo brought Amara to the kitchen, not the formal dining room, and made her tea himself. The same tea he'd ordered at the Orchid Room. He told her stories about the dojo, about Daejung as a boy, how the boy used to cry when he lost and then train twice as hard the next day until he won. Amara laughed, and the sound of her laughter in that big, quiet house filled a space that had been empty for a very long time. But there was someone else in that house, and this person was about to make everything much, much worse. Her name was Yoon Seo-yeon, Daejung's wife, arranged marriage, brokered between 2 powerful families when they were barely adults, a union of strategy, not love. And whatever warmth might have existed at the beginning had frozen solid years ago. Seo-yeon was beautiful the way expensive things are. Beautiful. Perfect skin. Perfect posture. Perfect emptiness behind the eyes. She didn't greet Daejung when he came home. Didn't ask about his day. Walked past Min-soo like he was part of the furniture. Once, early in the marriage, Min-soo had cooked her a meal, a simple dish from his childhood. She looked at it, pushed the plate aside, ordered delivery without a word. Min-soo never cooked for her again. Daejung tolerated it. Not from weakness, from love. His father believed in the old ways. A marriage, once made, was sacred. And Daejung, who could cripple nations with a phone call, couldn't bring himself to dishonor the man who raised him by ending a marriage his father had blessed. But the moment Seo-yeon walked into that kitchen and saw Amara sitting at the table, laughing with Min-soo, tea steam rising between them, something behind those perfect empty eyes shifted. She didn't say a word. She watched. She calculated. And within 48 hours, she had made arrangements to have Amara killed. A car was supposed to hit her on her walk home from the cultural center in Itaewon. Driver paid. Route planned. Timing set. Clean and quiet and untraceable. But Daejung found out. Because Daejung always found out. That was the reality of being the man he was. Secrets didn't survive around him. They surfaced like bodies in shallow water, whether people wanted them to or not. He intercepted the car, dealt with the driver in a way the driver would remember for the rest of his life. And then he went home and stood in the doorway of Seo-yeon's private wing and looked at her with those black eyes. For the first time in their marriage, she saw something in them that made her genuinely afraid. "You tried to kill her," he said. She lifted her chin, didn't deny it. "She doesn't belong here. She's a guest of my father. She's a threat to this household. She's a woman who stood up for an old man when you wouldn't have bothered to look up from your phone." That was the fracture, not the arranged marriage, not the years of silence. This, the moment she tried to kill the one person who'd shown his father kindness, and Dae-jung understood with absolute certainty that the woman he'd married had no bottom, no limit, no floor beneath which she would not sink. Seo-yeon moved out, went back to her family's compound, and the war began. The Yoon family was old money, ancient money, 1,000-year lineage tracing back to the Joseon dynasty, real estate empires, manufacturing conglomerates. Political connections woven so deep into the fabric of the nation that pulling one thread could unravel entire ministries. They were not the kind of family you crossed, unless you were Kang Dae-jung. The Yoons struck first. They went after Amara with everything they had, destroyed her credit, put holds on her visa, created phantom debts in her name, went after her grandmother in Busan, an 80-year-old woman living alone, pension frozen, medical insurance flagged, landlord pressured to evict. They reached across oceans. Her mother in Atlanta suddenly had tax problems. Her brother in Chicago was denied a business loan he'd already been approved for. Insurance claims rejected. Legal notices from nowhere. They pressed their thumb down on everyone Amara loved. She felt it in her bones. She told Dae-jung she'd leave. She didn't want to cause problems. She could disappear. Dae-jung looked at her and said, "Nothing was normal before you came." And then he unleashed something that no one on earth was prepared for. Here's what nobody knew. Not his enemies. Not his allies. Not even the Yoon family with all their intelligence networks. Nobody knew the full extent of what Kang Dae-jung actually was. They knew the brotherhood was vast. They knew he had influence. But what no institution, no government, no intelligence agency had ever fully mapped was the depth. 20 years of building something that wasn't an organization. It was an infrastructure. Financial instruments embedded in the banking systems of 14 countries. Logistics networks that crossed borders without touching a single customs checkpoint. Data that made governments cooperative. Alliances with people whose names appeared in no database, whose power moved through whispers and wire transfers and meetings in rooms that didn't officially exist. He was stronger than a nation. Not a metaphor. Literal. If Dae-jung moved against a country's economy, that economy bled. He had never used this power fully because he had never needed to, until a 1,000-year-old family tried to destroy the woman who saved his father's dignity. 72 hours. That's all it took. Banks first. Accounts frozen across 6 nations, not by law enforcement, by the banks themselves. Information delivered quietly to compliance departments. Hidden accounts exposed. Unreported assets surfaced. Connections to sanctioned entities in 3 jurisdictions. The Yoons woke up unable to access a single one. Credit cards dead. Wire transfers blocked. The patriarch called the bank chairman. The chairman never answered that phone again. Then business. Contracts shredded. Suppliers vanished. Regulatory inspections hit plants in Korea, Japan, and Germany on the same day. Not random. Targeted. Investigators who walked in already knowing what they'd find. Permits revoked. Insurance voided. Companies that had carried the Yoon name for centuries scraped it off their buildings like a curse. Then the legal assault. Lawsuits from 12 countries. Tax investigations in 9. Criminal referrals in 4. Lawyers quit within 48 hours. The patriarch was arrested at 72. cousins, uncles, board members, all swept up. 1,000 years of power erased in 3 days. Seoyeon called on the third day, crying, begging. He didn't answer, and through the destruction, Amara and Daejung were falling in love. Slowly. The dangerous kind of slowly where you don't realize it's happening until it's already too late. Evenings on the porch drinking tea without talking. Him showing her his father's garden, the stone path through cherry trees. Her teaching him a combination from the dojo he'd never mastered. Him pretending to struggle with it just to watch her demonstrate it again. Him cooking ramyeon badly. Her eating it with a straight face and calling it the best she'd ever had. Her falling asleep on the couch. Him draping a blanket over her and standing there, watching her breathe, feeling something crack open in his chest that he thought had been sealed permanently. She said his name differently than anyone else, not with deference, not with fear. She said it like it was just a name, like he was just a person. And for a man who had spent his entire adult life being treated as something more than human, being treated as merely human was the most extraordinary gift anyone had ever given him. Minsu watched his son come alive again the way he hadn't since. The boy was 12, training beside a fierce little girl who wasn't afraid of anything. The old man was happy, for the first time in years. But Amara was not. She felt it deeper than she'd ever felt anything. And that was the problem. The more she fell, the louder the voice in her head screamed, "You don't deserve this? Look at who he is. Look at who you are. He commands nations. 3 weeks ago you were carrying plates. This doesn't happen to girls like you." So when Daejung told her he loved her, one evening on that porch, soul glittering in the distance, his father asleep inside, the world finally quiet enough to hear the truth, Amara's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I can't." "Why?" "Because this isn't real. You are you, and I am me. Those two things don't end up together. Not in any world I've ever lived in. And for all his power, for all the armies and networks and empires, he could not make her believe she was worthy of being loved by him. That was the one thing in the universe his power could not touch." She stood up, wiped her eyes, and said something that broke him. Quietly, completely, the way only truth can break a person. "I know we'll never be together, but please, allow me this much." He didn't speak, he just looked at her. "Let me tell you how, in a sky crowded with stars, you remain the only moon I see. How among billions of faces in this world it is only your eyes I ever search for." Her voice was steady, her hands were shaking. "Let me tell you how you are the fire I would reach for without fear of being burned, the warmth I would choose, even knowing the cost." She took a breath. "I know we'll never be together, but please, allow me to love you aloud, to love you in ways you never heard, and perhaps never felt, even if only once." The most powerful man in Asia had tears running down his face. He didn't wipe them away. Amara stepped closer, put her hands on either side of his face, looked into those black eyes. The eyes of the boy from the dojo. The boy who became something no one could have predicted. The boy who knelt on pavement and called an old man in handcuffs father. She kissed him. Not the way you kiss someone when you're starting something. The way you kiss someone when you're ending something that never got to begin. Like she was memorizing the shape of him, storing it somewhere safe, somewhere deep, somewhere that time and distance and logic could never reach. His hands came up and held her face, and his thumbs brushed the tears from her cheeks, and for one single moment, the most powerful man in Asia and a girl from Atlanta were just two people on a porch in the dark, holding on to something they both knew they couldn't keep. She pulled back, whispered against his lips, "I will be yours in the next life." She packed the small bag she'd brought, folded the clothes Minsu bought for her, and left them on the bed. Left the phone Daejung gave her on the kitchen counter. She took nothing from that house except the memory of being inside it. She left Seoul, left Korea, went back to the one-bedroom apartment and the job that paid in hours, and the world where nobody knew her name. She told herself it was better this way. Told herself love wasn't enough to cross the distance between who he was and who she was. Told herself 100 things. None of them stopped the ache. Daejung let her go. Not because he wanted to, because he understood something most powerful people never learn. You cannot force someone to accept what they don't believe they deserve. Not with money, not with power, not with all the armies in the world. Min-soo found his son on the porch the next morning. Same chair, same skyline, tea gone cold in the cup. The old man sat beside him, didn't speak for a long time, then quietly. The girl from the dojo. Yes, she loves you. I know. And you love her. More than anything. Min-soo nodded, looked at the city, and said softly, "Then, it isn't over. It's never over when both hearts know the truth. Sometimes love needs more time than one life to find its way home." Daejung closed his eyes. He pressed his father's rough, scarred hand against his own, and he held on. Somewhere over the Pacific, Amara sat in a window seat, forehead pressed against the glass. The ocean stretched below her, endless and dark. She touched the tattoo on her hand, the lotus, the ring of fire, the three characters that meant discipline, honor, and heart. She closed her eyes, and she made a promise to the sky. In the next life, I will be yours. Now listen, this story broke me. If it broke you too, drop a comment. Tell me which part hit you the hardest. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell because I have more stories like this coming and you don't want to miss a single one. I'll see you in the next one.